Okay, welcome everybody. Jason Tallarico of One Timers. I'm going to go through question 2 from 2024 July, and let's start it right now. And I'm going to call the question first. All conveyances were properly recorded immediately after execution and delivery, which kind of tells you they're not really getting at the recording acts or subsequent bona fide purchaser who records first, because everything was recorded immediately. So number one, what property interest, if any, does Darla have in Lot B? So whatever Darla has in Lot B, those are focused. Call number 2, what claims may Simon make to maintain a right of way over Lot B to the public highway? So clearly that's going to be an easement over Lot B. And we want to know what interest Darla has in Lot B and whether or not Simon has an easement over Lot B to get to the highway. So that's what they're asking. And that's why we go to the call to the question. We know it's real property. We kind of understand the focus of this question. All right. Olivia owned Greenacre in fee simple. Fee simple absolute, best and highest use of the property. Greenacre consisted of 2 unimproved adjoining lots. So they're, if anything, is going to be an easement appurtenant because they're adjoining. We have Lot A and Lot B, and because they're unimproved, they're vacant. There's nobody who lives there. There's not going to be any notice for possession, somebody in possession, because it says unimproved. And a dirt road led from Lot A across Lot B to a public highway. So that road that goes across Lot B is plainly visible, which means anybody who purchases or receives Lot B will take it subject to that easement. It's technically not an easement right now because Olivia owns both properties. 60 years ago, when the examiners give you a date of 60 years ago, what that means is they're likely going to get at adverse possession, because adverse possession can only be tested in one of 2 ways. Is that they give you a statute and tell you how long the jurisdiction's time frame is to recover real property, which usually is 10 years, 20 years. Or if they give you a date from 20 or 30 years ago, that's the examiner's way generally of testing adverse possession. Now it's 60 years ago. Olivia conveyed Lot B to Barry as a gift. Just because Barry is not a good faith purchaser does not matter. It only, good faith purchasers, the recording acts only apply to subsequent purchasers for value, not people who got it before. A lot of times students get confused about that. So Barry received it as a gift, and as long as Barry properly records, which of course the call of the question says he does, he's going to maintain his interest in the property, subject to the following clause. So if at any time Barry, his heirs, successors, or assigns shall use the premise for any purpose other than as a personal residence. So it means it can only be used for residential property. Lot B shall immediately vest in fee simple to Zach or his surviving descendants. So what do we have here? We have O to B to Z. And because the conveyance goes from grantee to grantee, that comes within the rule against perpetuities, because obviously this property can be used for residential property, can be used for residential purposes for the next 150 years by Barry's lineal descendants or whoever gets sold the property. And then at that time, they could change it over to like a church or agriculture or whatever, and then it would immediately go to Zach or his surviving descendants, and they would actually have a future interest. So this is an executory interest because it goes from grantee to grantee. And it's only when interests go from grantee to grantee do they come within the rule against perpetuities. If it just said O to B and if B didn't use it for residential purposes, then it goes back to O. That would not come within the rule. Only conveyances between grantee to grantee. If it's the grantor to grantee, and if the grantee messes up back to the grantor, that would not come within the rule. So here, this interest is an executory interest that's subject to the rule against perpetuities. And because it can vest longer than the perpetuities period, so life and being plus 21 years, the interest to Zach gets strict. So shall Lot B shall immediately vest in fee simple to Zach's surviving descendants. Essentially, we just crossed that out. And so it's Barry has a fee simple determinable, and Olivia has a possibility of revert, which means the property will revert back to Olivia if Barry does not use this as a residence. There you go. So it was an executory interest that violates the rule against perpetuities, which turns into a fee simple determinable. And the Olivia has a possibility reverter. That's how you properly analyze that conveyance. And I think a lot of people had trouble with that. Shortly after receiving title, Barry began living in a cottage he built on Lot B. Perfect, exactly what he's supposed to do. And don't forget, Zach has nothing. At the time of the conveyance of Lot B, Zach had not yet had any children. Ironically, that doesn't matter because Zach has no interest, so none of Zach's children will have any interest. And Zach has since died, and his granddaughter Darla is now his only surviving descendant. Now, if that conveyance would have been valid for some reason, let's just say it says Barry shall only use it for a personal residence during his lifetime, and if he doesn't use it as a personal residence during his lifetime, then to Zach. In that situation, now, because we're going to know within Barry's life whether or not he uses it as a personal residence, then Darla would have a future interest. But because it violates the rule, Darla has nothing, and that's how you properly analyze it. So she has absolutely no interest in Lot B. Shortly after, at the time of the conveyance of Lot B, we said Zach had not yet any children. We got this. We're on the 30 years ago. And we're almost through this essay. 30 years ago, Olivia died. Don't forget, Olivia now can pass on through her descendants, whether by will or intestate succession, her interest in Lot B. Her son Simon inherited Lot A. So he owns Lot A, which we don't have any issue with. He built a house on Lot A 1 year later. Okay, so this is 29 years ago, he builds a house. Through the years, Simon Wrigley used the dirt road across Barry's adjacent lot to get to and from his house and the public highway because there was no other access. All right, so two things there. If there is no other access out off of Lot A, then we're gonna have an easement by necessity. So Simon, that's call number 2, as you can see, the first 4 paragraphs go to call 1, and it appears that the final 2 paragraphs are going to go to call 2. So Simon inherited Lot A, he built a house on Lot A. Throughout the years, he regularly used the dirt road across Barry's adjacent Lot B to get from it. We got that. Now, also, because of the fact that this road was there before Olivia conveyed the lot to Barry as a gift, you also would have an easement by prior use. Prior use means there has to be common ownership, which Olivia owned both lots A and B, and it has to be plainly visible. And clearly the road was plainly visible because it went right across Lot B to the public highway. So even if you didn't have an easement by necessity, you would have an easement by prior use, and the examiners would want you to discuss both. There you go. And also, because he's been using it for 30 years, I don't think he's got Barry's permission or whether it's hostile. So could it be that Simon has acquired an easement by prescription? Possibly. But the issue becomes down to whether or not the use was hostile to Barry, and it doesn't seem like Barry has any problem with it. So interesting about that issue. 4 months ago, Barry sold Lot B to developer for $100,000 for $1 million, which is fine because Barry can sell it. Developer demolished the cottage, began constructing an office building on the lot, and began closing off access to the dirt road from Simon's house. Now, once he began constructing the office building, at that moment, the property now vests in Olivia because she died. It goes to Simon. So Simon now is the owner of Lot B. And believe it or not, at this point, the clock for adverse possession begins to run against Simon. If Simon doesn't developer demolish cars. Okay, because of the fact that developer is no longer using Lot B as a residential purposes, the lot it automatically inures back to Simon. So Simon now owns Lot B in fee simple. However, if he doesn't kick developer off the property within whatever 10 years of the period to acquire property by adverse possession, Simon will lose Lot B by adverse possession. Of course, it's only been 4 months, so that issue tends up not to be a factor. However, I would think the examiners want you to discuss that. So now developers began closing off access to the dirt road from Simon's house. So now a developer is trying to oust or adversely possess the easement, which is on Lot B. And of course, it's only been 4 months, so the period for adverse possession has not run yet. But however, if developer continues to live on lot B for, let's say, 10 years from now, then he would own lot B by adverse possession, and it would take it from Simon. So Simon needs to actually assert his rights and kick developer off of lot B, because Simon technically is the fee simple owner. All conveyances were properly recorded immediately after execution and delivery. So what property interest does Darla have in lot B? Absolutely none, because of the fact that the executory interest violated the rule against perpetuities, which makes it a void conveyance, or at least that part that we crossed out. And therefore, Olivia and her successors have a possibility of revert, which it did revert back to Simon once the developer began constructing an office building and once it was no longer used as a personal residence. Now, what claims can Simon make to maintain a right of way over lot B? He can say that he's got easement by prior use and easement by necessity. And the necessity will actually last as long as the necessity is there. So if they end up building a road next to lot A, then the necessity ends, but you would still have an easement by prior use. So there you go. That's all that's going on in this essay. It actually wasn't as difficult. I know a lot of people have trouble with the conveyance, but there you go. There's real property essay, question 2 from 2024 July. Hope that helped you out.